I knew before we even left the house that the afternoon would end in humiliation. That knot in my stomach was familiar, the one that always tightened when I had to face my family. It had been that way since the divorce, maybe even before then, if I was being honest with myself. But this time, I wasn't alone. My daughter sat beside me in the passenger seat, smoothing the front of her yellow sundress with careful fingers, and I hated myself for bringing her into it. "Just be yourself, sweetie," I whispered, reaching across the console to squeeze her hand. "You're perfect the way you are." She gave me a small smile, the kind that pretends not to notice the fear trembling underneath. My girl Allura, but everyone calls her Lara, was 14 years old. Too young to know the weight of judgment, but old enough to feel it like barbed wire wrapped around her skin. Her hair, dark and silky, had been tucked behind her ears, and on her wrist was the little silver bracelet she bought at her school's craft fair. Nothing expensive, nothing that would impress Jenna, my sister, or the rest of the family who measured worth in dollar signs and appearances. But to me, she was beautiful. I wanted to turn the car around to drive anywhere but my sister's house. But that meant surrender, and I'd spent years convincing myself that I couldn't cut ties completely, not without being labeled dramatic, bitter, ungrateful. So instead, I parked among the rows of shiny SUVs and polished sedans, my beat-up minivan already announcing our place on the ladder. From the outside, Jenna's home looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Perfect hedges, white columns, the smell of barbecue drifting through the warm air. Laughter floated across the lawn. Kids ran, adults lounged in chairs, drinks in hand. To an outsider, it might have looked like joy. But I knew better. My family didn't gather to share love. They gathered to measure, to compare, to remind each other where everyone stood. "Late as usual," my mother said as I walked up the driveway. She barely looked at me, just fanned herself with a paper plate. Her words landed like darts, casual cruelty disguised as conversation. Jenna appeared next, gliding across the yard in her crisp white dress, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She pulled me into a one-armed hug, stiff and practiced, then turned her attention to Lara. Her smile faltered for just a second, almost too quick to catch, but I caught it. "Wow, you're getting so big," she said to my daughter. The words were sweet, but the edge in her voice was sharp enough to slice skin. Then, before Lara could even respond, Jenna pressed a tray of soda cans into her hands. "Be a dear and pass these around, okay? The kids are being lazy." I saw my daughter's eyes flick to mine, questioning, hoping. Should I refuse? Should I fight? But I gave her a tight smile and nodded. "Not now," I thought. "We'll survive this and leave." She swallowed her pride and began weaving through the crowd, cheeks flushed, offering drinks to people who barely looked at her. I sat at a picnic table, my jaw tight, trying to swallow the rage rising in my chest. "She needs to toughen up," my mother muttered beside me, as if cruelty was medicine, as if humiliation was strength training. I yanked my arm from her grasp and rose my eyes, never leaving my daughter. She was trying so hard not to cry. I could see it in the blink of her lashes, in the tremble of her mouth as Jenna's voice rang out across the yard. "Did you knit that dress yourself, sweetheart?" Jenna called, her laugh bubbling into the air. A few people chuckled. Others pretended not to hear. But Lara heard. She always heard. I should have grabbed her hand and walked out then. I should have said enough. But before I could, the sound of an engine cut through the yard. Heads turned as a sleek black SUV rolled into the driveway, so out of place among the battered trucks and family vans. It came to a smooth stop. The driver's door swung open and a woman stepped out. She wasn't anyone I knew. Tall, elegant, sharp, without trying too hard, she carried herself with a presence that made the entire yard fall silent. Even Jenna froze mid-sip of her wine. My mother's eyebrows arched. But the woman didn't glance at them. Her eyes found only my daughter. She walked straight toward Lara. My heart pounded as I watched every muscle in my body tense. Lara still held the tray, confused, uncertain. The woman crouched in front of her and smiled gently, her voice carrying clear as glass. "Princess," she said, "are you ready for your surprise?" The tray wobbled in Lara's hands. She blinked at me, her mouth opening with no sound. And in that moment, the entire backyard froze. Forks hung midair. Conversations stopped. Even the air seemed to pause. Something was about to change. She rose from her crouch with a grace that made people straighten in their chairs, and for a heartbeat I thought she might be some kind of mistake, lost delivery driver, wrong address, an aunt from a branch of the family I'd never met. But then she turned to me, extended a hand with a calm professionalism that didn't belong to this backyard, and asked if I was Callie Morgan. The syllables of my name sounded different in her mouth, clean, deliberate, like a contract being read aloud. I nodded before I found my voice, and when I said yes, my own name wobbled like it wasn't entirely mine. She introduced herself as Amelia Blackwell. The Blackwell landed first heavy, the way certain names do when they carry invisible buildings behind them. Not a neighbor, not a cousin of a cousin, but a woman wearing authority like a well-tailored coat. She said she'd been trying to reach me through my daughter's school, that schedules were tricky, that she wasn't certain we would be at today's gathering, and I watched my sister's posture stiffen at the implication that a stranger had been invited into her kingdom by a route she didn't control. "What is this about?" I asked, careful with my breath, aware of how the entire yard had tilted toward us. Forks hovering. Smiles suspended, the grill hissing like a whisper. Amelia didn't perform. She didn't sweep an arm or raise her voice. She turned back to my daughter as if the world had narrowed down to a single point of light, and said that several months ago, a portfolio of fashion sketches had been sent to a statewide youth arts initiative, that 300 submissions had been reviewed, and that one of them, a collection of dresses with lines that looked like they had been whispered into existence, had held the judges in place. She said the words stood out immediately, and I felt my ribs loosen one by one, as if a tight corset had been unlaced. Lara's mouth opened and then closed again. She didn't know where to put her hands, the tray, the air, her sides. She glanced at me, eyes glossy, a question without sound. I wanted to kiss her forehead the way I did when she was small and scalded by a world that didn't make space for softness. Instead, I steadied the tray and told her with my hands, my shoulders, my whole body, "I'm right here." Amelia reached into a structured leather bag and brought out a white envelope, whose simplicity was a kind of luxury heavy paper, crisp edges, the kind of stationery that says, "We do not need to shout to be heard." She described the program as a mentorship in partnership with a top-tier arts academy, a full summer scholarship with travel included. She used words like incubation studio, access, critique, circle, portfolio, development showcase. They rang through the backyard like bells no one else could hear. Her drawings, I asked, partly because disbelief had its hand around my throat, partly because I wanted the words to exist out here in the open air where everyone could see them. My daughter's drawings, the ones she made late at night at the kitchen table with a pencil ground down to a nub, the ones she carried to school in a folder that used to hold coupons, the ones she hid when her aunt walked by, because softness becomes a target in certain rooms. "Yes," Amelia said, and her smile warmed without losing its precision. "She has a gift. We would be honored to help her develop it." I felt Jenna sidle up like a draft of cold air. She laughed a little, the brittle sound she uses when other people have the microphone and she wants it back. She said something about cartoons, about how kids draw all sorts of little pictures, about how fun it all is. I turned, and the look I gave her could have shaved wood. "They are not cartoons," I said, not loudly, just with the weight of 100 evenings watching my daughter sketch bodices like prayers. Amelia didn't look at Jenna. Or rather, she looked and then dismissed, the way you step around a small obstacle on a sidewalk. "Talent grows in quiet places," she said, to no one in particular, and I watched my daughter's cheeks bloom with color that had nothing to do with shame. The envelope traded hands. Inside it was paperwork, a schedule, a letter from a director whose name I recognized because it had been printed beneath magazine photos I could never afford, and a note from a judge that used the phrase "natural visionary" as if the words belonged together. Lara held it as if it might become smoke. I saw her absorb each line like a thirsty field takes rain, hesitant at first, then greedily, then with a softness at the edges that signals life. The applause started in a ragged, uncertain way, the kind of clapping people do when they sense something important has happened but aren't sure who is allowed to lead the sound. Some faces lit with genuine joy. Others rearranged themselves into politeness, like furniture dragged to cover stains. My mother didn't clap. She sat with her mouth compressed into the thin white line that says she will speak later when the room has softened, and she can reassert the narrative. Uncle Rick muttered that he hadn't seen that coming, as if my daughter's interior life were a TV plot twist, and not the slow work of years. Amelia explained that there was a welcome dinner that evening, a chance to meet mentors, that a car had been arranged to take accepted students directly from wherever they were. If she says yes, she added, looking at me, but speaking to the part of my soul that still thinks permission is something you have to ask for, we can handle everything else. Yes. The word arrived in my mouth and settled there like an anchor. I turned to my daughter, to the trembling that had transformed into a contained vibration, like a violin string held under a bow. "Are you ready?" I asked without words. Her nod was small and seismic. Jenna tried one last time to collect the pieces of herself. She made a show of saying it was odd to arrive at a private family gathering uninvited, wondering aloud if that was appropriate, as if etiquette was a weapon you could swing to slice a girl back down to size. Amelia was polite the way bank vaults are polite. The school had told her we would be here. She said it with the firmness of someone who knows where doors are and doesn't need to knock very hard. We were leaving. I didn't know I had decided until I heard my voice clear as glass saying it. "We are leaving." I told Lara to get her bag. Jenna rolled her eyes the way people do when the script refuses to play along, called me dramatic, tried to cloak this in that old word, teasing the one that has bruised so many children into compliance. I turned and named the thing out loud in a tone I didn't recognize as mine until I felt my spine lengthen to accommodate it. It wasn't teasing, it was cruelty, and I would not set my child down inside it like a dog at a post. My mother said I was overreacting. Of course she did. She perched on judgment's narrow ledge the way acrobats perch on wires, and she wasn't coming down just because a stranger in an expensive car had altered the weather. She said 14-year-olds need to learn to take a joke. I looked at my daughter's hands, at the callus on her middle finger from hours of sketching, at the faint gloss on her nails, from the cheap polish she saved for special occasions, at a bracelet swinging like a small moon. What she needs, I said, is to be surrounded by people who believe in her. If that requires leaving this backyard, then I will leave this backyard, so fast the grass will burn. Lara returned with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Something had shifted in the set of her jaw. Not defiance exactly, more like a decision, and the relief that follows when your body finally lines up with it. "Are you sure?" I asked. She said yes in a voice that didn't wobble. I hugged her and whispered into her hair, a promise as old as motherhood: "I will be right here when you come back." Amelia's hand on my arm was steady and warm. "We will take good care of her," she said, and I believed her because her version of care was not the sticky sweet variety that asks a child to make themselves small to fit inside it. It was the kind that opens doors and stands back. The driver opened the door of the SUV. My daughter paused and looked back over the field of faces, the same faces that had just finished assessing her dress and her usefulness with the appraiser's narrowed eyes. She didn't wave. She didn't perform gratitude to soothe anyone. She got in. The door shut with a solid sound that felt exactly like a boundary forming, and the engine thrummed like a heartbeat. When the car pulled away, a small wind moved across the yard, warm and almost kind, the way air feels after a storm has punched a hole in the haze. I turned to my family, to their arranged expressions, to my sister's outrage, trying to bloom into something she could wear comfortably. "You didn't break her," I said, not loudly, not theatrically. "You tried. You failed." Jenna scoffed that it wasn't a lottery, that I was being ridiculous. "No," I said, "she won something better. Freedom. I didn't stay to collect a plate or pretend I wanted leftovers. I walked to my car with my head high, the way I hope my daughter will walk through every room for the rest of her life." In the quiet that followed after the minivans and the pickup trucks and the manicured hedges, my phone buzzed with a photo from Amelia. There was my girl in the same yellow sundress, standing in front of a ballroom entrance. It didn't look modest anymore. It looked deliberate. She stood with her shoulders back and light in her eyes, and a smile that reached places it hadn't been allowed to visit. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and let the picture pour into me until the old ache loosened its grip. When the call came later, her voice sweet with nerves telling me about journals stamped with their names, about a girl from Oregon and another from New York, about choosing a mentor, like a real designer, I realized this wasn't a detour, it was a road. And it had always been under her feet, even when the rest of us insisted the only path was the one that circled back to our own approval. Back at home, the house felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just honest. I washed a mug I didn't remember using and stood at the sink, staring at the uneven line where paint meets tile. There is a particular quiet that follows a good decision, a kind of internal weather clearing. I felt it then. Not triumph, no fist in the air, no victory lap. Something steadier. The understanding that I had stopped agreeing to a story that hurt my child. That I had finally chosen the door marked out. My sister would spin a new version by morning. My mother would post a congratulatory message that left out the part where she sat with her arms crossed. The cousins would text each other in the tone people reserve for odd occurrences. Black SUVs, unexpected programs, surprise arrivals. Let them. There was a time when I would have tried to correct their angles, defend myself from their edits. Tonight I let the lies blow past like weather I no longer lived in. I sat on the sofa with my phone face up and waited for sleep that did not come because peace had arrived first and demanded to be noticed. Every so often I would open the photo again, Lara at the threshold feet, on the line between the world that measured her, by how small she could make herself, and the world that asked how large her imagination could grow. I thought about the tray she had carried through the yard, the way it wobbled when someone mocked the dress she bought with babysitting money, the way her hands had held steadier when they held the envelope. Tomorrow would bring logistics, forms and consent, and a suitcase pulled from a closet that still held last year's winter scarf. Tomorrow would bring my mother's call and my sister's performance, and the thin, hungry looks of people who hate when the mirror they have been using suddenly shows them someone else's face. But tonight, there was only this: a girl on her way to a table that had been laid for her where no one would ask her to serve before she could sit. I turned off the lamp, let the dark pour over the room like ink, and whispered to the ceiling, the simplest prayer I know. Let her meet people who see her, and ask nothing in return, but the truth of what she can become. The house answered in its ordinary way. Pipes clicking the fridge, sighing the clock marking time the way it always has, and I let myself breathe to its rhythm. When I finally drove away from that backyard, the silence inside the car felt heavier than the laughter we had left behind. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly the steering column creaked, but I didn't loosen them. The hum of the tires on the road was the only sound, but it carried an odd kind of music, the rhythm of departure, the beat of change. I kept seeing the black SUV in my rearview mirror, even though it was long gone, the image of my daughter inside it etched onto my retinas like sunlight. I didn't know if I had made the right decision. I didn't know if I had just given her over to strangers whose promises shone too bright. But what I did know was this staying would have broken her. Watching her mocked minimized a race that would have done more damage than any unknown future could. Sometimes survival is a gamble, and that night I gambled on hope. At home, the air was different. Quieter, yes, but also charged like a room after lightning. I walked through each space with unfamiliar steps, as if the house itself was holding its breath in my daughter's absence. Her sketches were still scattered on the kitchen table, the graphite lines whispering stories to no one. Her jacket hung by the door, one sleeve inside out. And on her bed, a stuffed bear she hadn't taken since she said she was too old for it now. I sat on her bed and held that bear as if it were a substitute heartbeat. That's when the tears came silent, at first, then jagged, the kind that split through old scars. I thought about every birthday where she blew out candles, surrounded by cousins who got shinier gifts. Every Christmas where she waited politely while her name wasn't called. Every word my mother or sister had dropped like shards, incomplete, broken less. And I thought about the way Amelia had said natural visionary. 2 words that no one in my family had ever paired with my child. The phone buzzed late that night. A message from Amelia, short and steady. She is safe. She is smiling. Then a photo, a group of kids her age standing in front of a studio, sketchbooks in hand, my daughter among them, her smile hesitant but real. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. She belonged there. I could feel it in my bones. Of course, my family didn't let the night end quietly. By morning, my voicemail was full. My mother's voice, brittle with rage, accused me of stealing attention from Jenna's barbecue, of letting outsiders humiliate the family name. Jenna's message dripped with sarcasm. Well, congratulations, I guess. I hope you're proud of the circus you caused. My uncle's call was shorter, just a gruff, "What the hell was that about?" as if my daughter's achievement was a scandal rather than a triumph. I didn't call them back. For once, silence felt like strength. Days passed. Amelia kept me updated with texts and emails, Lara sketching in the studio, listening intently during critiques, laughing with other students over late-night pizza. Each update was a lifeline, proof that the gamble had been worth it. My girl was not just surviving, she was blooming. But my family's bitterness didn't fade. When I finally answered one of my mother's calls, she launched immediately into accusation. "You embarrassed Jenna," she snapped. "On her day, no less. You should have stopped that woman from parading in like she owned the place." "She didn't parade," I said quietly. "She came for Lara. And Lara deserves every bit of it. She's a child. She doesn't need these distractions." "No, Mom," I said, and my voice didn't shake this time. "She doesn't need your cruelty. She doesn't need Jenna's jokes. What she needs is someone who sees her, and she finally has that." The silence that followed was jagged. For the first time, I realized my mother's control had always been rooted in my fear of disappointing her. But now I wasn't afraid. Meanwhile, Jenna couldn't keep the story contained. People in town talked. At the grocery store, at church, at the park, everywhere I went, someone asked about the scholarship, about that program. Some were curious, some envious, some genuinely delighted. But every time I felt my daughter's worth grow louder than my sister's perfect lawn, louder than my mother's sharp tongue. It wasn't just Lara who was changing, I was changing too. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with her scattered sketches. Dresses, coats, gowns, each with lines as fluid as water. For years I had seen them as child's play. But now I saw them differently. These weren't doodles. These were visions. I thought about all the times I had told her to hide them when Jenna walked by, all the times I had swallowed my pride instead of speaking up. Guilt pressed down on me like a weight. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm sorry, baby. I should have fought for you sooner." The days stretched into weeks. When Lara called me on the phone, her voice was electric. She told me about fabrics she'd never touched before, about mentors who treated her like an equal, about friends who didn't laugh when she spoke. "Mom," she said one night, "for the first time I feel seen." My heart cracked and healed at the same time. Seen. That's all she had ever needed. But of course, not everyone was ready to let go of the old script. At the next family gathering I attended without Lara, the silence was thick. My mother avoided eye contact. Jenna made a half-hearted joke about how designing dresses won't pay the bills. And I, for the first time in my life, didn't shrink. I looked her in the eye and said, "Neither will cruelty." The table went still. For once, I wasn't the one swallowing words. That night driving home, I realized something monumental. The SUV hadn't just taken my daughter away. It had taken me too. Away from fear. Away from silence. Away from a family that mistook cruelty for strength. And when my daughter came home weeks later, her arms full of sketches, and her smile brighter than I'd ever seen, I knew this wasn't just her transformation. It was mine too. When the black SUV finally rolled back into our driveway weeks later, my breath caught like it had the day it carried her away. I hurried out onto the porch, heart thudding, half afraid she would step out, changed into someone I no longer knew. But when the door opened, there she was, still my daughter, but brighter. Her steps were lighter, her eyes sharper, her shoulders set with a confidence I hadn't seen before. She carried a portfolio case nearly as tall as her, and when she smiled, it was the kind of smile that comes from being recognized, not tolerated. "Mom," she cried, dropping the case on the porch to wrap her arms around me. I held her so tight I thought I might break us both, but she didn't let go. She smelled of graphite fabric and a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume, like she'd been sitting close to girls who laughed late into the night. She was different, yes, but in the way a bud is different from the flower it becomes. Inside, she spread her sketches across the kitchen table, pages upon pages, of designs that looked alive, more intricate than anything she'd ever dared to show me before. She described critiques from mentors, friendships with kids who loved the same things, a showcase at the end where she had watched her work walk across a small runway. Her voice overflowed with details, tumbling fast, eager, unstoppable. I let it wash over me like a river I had been dying of thirst beside. That night, as she fell asleep in her own bed again, clutching her worn stuffed bear in one arm and her sketchbook in the other, I sat in the hallway just listening to her breathe. It was the sound of peace, the kind I had begged the universe for and almost stopped believing she could have. But peace doesn't mean absence of conflict. It only means you are strong enough to stand through it. And soon enough the storm returned in familiar voices. My mother called her tone clipped measured, as if she were balancing on a tightrope. Well, she said I suppose she had her fun. But now it's time to focus on real life. School, college, a stable career. Don't let her get distracted by childish dreams. Something in me snapped, but not the way it used to. Not into shame, not into silence. This time, it snapped into clarity. Her dreams are real life, I said. They're the most real thing about her, and I won't let you steal that from her. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale, and for once she hung up on me, not the other way around. Jenna was less subtle. She called it a fashion camp, rolling the words like marbles meant to trip me. At the next gathering, she made sure to tell everyone that some people think their kid is the next big thing just because they doodle on paper. I met her gaze steadily across the table and asked if she was jealous. The silence that followed tasted like victory. But Laura didn't need me to fight her battles anymore. She was learning to do it herself. One evening while I washed dishes, she came into the kitchen, phone in hand. "Mom," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes fiery. "Aunt Jenna posted on Facebook that my drawings are just a hobby and that you're filling my head with nonsense." The old me would have panicked, scrambled for damage control, tried to shield her. But Laura simply shrugged. I commented back. I said, "At least my nonsense got published in the State Showcase magazine. What did your barbecue get published in?" I dropped the dish in the sink and turned to stare at her. For a second, I thought I should scold her for disrespect, but the pride swelled too big. I laughed instead, deep and free, and so did she. That was when I knew the cycle was breaking. Still, the ache of the past lingered. One night I sat alone with an old photo album. There was Jenna at prom in her perfect dress, my mother's hand proudly on her shoulder. There was me blurry in the background, holding Lara as a toddler unnoticed. I traced the photo with my finger and felt both grief and relief. Grief for the years my daughter grew up invisible to the people who should have cherished her. Relief that those years had not managed to dim her light. When Lara entered the room and saw me with the album, she sat beside me, flipping through the pages. "They never really saw us, did they?" she asked softly. "No," I admitted, my voice breaking. "But we see each other, and that's enough." Her head rested on my shoulder, and for a long time we just sat there in silence, rewriting the story, not with words, but with presence. The town, meanwhile, had shifted in its own way. People who once whispered about my divorce now whispered about my daughter's scholarship. The same mouths that had muttered broken home now muttered talented, remarkable, going places. Hypocrisy. Of course, but I didn't care. Because for Lara, the whispers no longer mattered. She had found a place where her worth wasn't conditional. Weeks turned into months. Lara's sketches grew bolder, her confidence stronger. She applied for another program this time without hiding it from me, without fear of being mocked. When the acceptance letter came, she waved it in my face with a grin so radiant it erased years of shadows. And this time, when I drove her to the pickup spot where another sleek SUV waited, I didn't cry from fear. I cried from pride. As I hugged her goodbye, I whispered, "You are not incomplete. You never were. You are whole, you are brilliant, and you are free." Her smile said she already knew. I drove home alone, but I wasn't lonely. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive with the echo of her dreams' sketches taped to the fridge, pencils scattered like breadcrumbs across the table. The silence was no longer heavy. It was spacious, expansive, waiting to be filled with possibility. And for the first time, I realized something: I hadn't just raised a survivor. I had raised a creator, a truth teller, a breaker of chains, and she in turn had freed me. The last time we gathered as a family, it didn't feel like family anymore. The backyard was smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was just that my eyes had adjusted to wider horizons. Jenna stood at the grill, forcing a smile that cracked under the weight of silence, while my mother rearranged napkins as if control could be restored by straightening corners. My father said little as always, but I noticed the way his eyes followed Lara when she walked into the yard. And for once, there was no ridicule in his gaze. Maybe admiration. Maybe guilt. Lara wore a dress she had designed herself, stitched from fabric she bought with scholarship money. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. The lines were clean, the colors bold, and the confidence with which she carried it made it breathtaking. She didn't shrink into the background like before. She didn't hide behind me. She walked straight across the grass, shoulders back, eyes clear. And though no one said it out loud, the balance of power shifted in that moment. "Lovely dress," my mother murmured, her voice tighter than the string of pearls around her neck. Lara thanked her, calm and unbothered. Jenna made no jokes this time. She poured herself another glass of wine and looked away. I realized then that the SUV hadn't just carried Lara to opportunity. It had carried us both out of their narrative. We weren't trapped anymore, dancing on strings they pulled. We had cut ourselves free, and freedom has a way of unsettling those who survive on control. After dinner, while others drifted into shallow conversation, Lara pulled me aside. "Mom," she said, "I don't want to come here anymore. Not because I'm angry, because I don't need to prove anything to them." Her words sank into me with both relief and sorrow. Relief because she finally knew her worth. Sorrow because family should never be the place you walk away from in order to breathe. But I nodded. "You don't have to," I told her. "We'll build our own gatherings, our own kind of family." And we did. In the months that followed, our home filled with people who saw us: mentors, friends, classmates of Lara's who sprawled on our living room floor sketching late into the night. There was laughter in our kitchen that wasn't sharpened by comparison. There were celebrations that didn't measure worth in cars or columns or credit scores. We had traded a table of judgment for a circle of truth, and the difference was life itself. Sometimes late at night, I would still hear my mother's voice in my head, sharp, dismissive, reminding me of every failure she thought I embodied. But then I would hear Lara laughing in her room, or see her sketches taped proudly to the fridge, and I knew we were rewriting the story. Broken homes don't have to break children. Cruel words don't have to define destinies. A single act of courage, a child standing a car, pulling up, a choice to leave, can change everything. And yet I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd fought soon enough, if the scars of years of humiliation would ever fully fade from my daughter's heart. But healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning they are proof of survival. My daughter is proof. The final showcase of her program came at the end of summer. I sat in the audience, heart hammering, as models walked the runway in her designs. Each piece carried a fragment of her: the bold jacket stitched with hidden embroidery, like secrets finally revealed; the gown that flowed like forgiveness; the simple dress that mirrored the one she'd worn the day Amelia found her. When the applause erupted louder than I'd ever heard in any room, Lara didn't shrink. She stepped forward, bowed, and smiled, not for their approval, but for herself. I cried that night, but they were different tears. Not of shame, not of rage, but of release. I cried because my daughter had been mocked, belittled, nearly broken, and yet here she stood, radiant, whole, unshaken. I cried because somewhere along the way I had found myself too. And now, speaking to you, sharing this story like a confession I've carried too long, I want you to know something. You are not defined by the tables that refuse to make room for you. You are not defined by relatives who mistake cruelty for strength. You are not incomplete just because someone else says you are. My daughter taught me that truth is louder than mockery. That sometimes salvation pulls up in a black SUV when you least expect it. That when you finally step into your own light, no one can dim it again. So if you've listened this far, if you've felt even a flicker of recognition in my story, I ask you, don't hide your scars. Don't shrink to fit into someone else's approval. Build your own table. Fill it with people who see you, who celebrate you, who tell you that you are already enough. And if this story spoke to you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. Leave me a comment, tell me your truth, because the more we speak, the less the lies can suffocate us. Together we can be the black SUV pulling up for someone else, reminding them that their story isn't over, it's just beginning. Because broken isn't the end. Sometimes it's the doorway to becoming whole.